All right, so let's get started today. I also want to give a big thank you for everybody being here. And really, even before that, just for trusting GoFundMe with your fundraiser. We know that a lot of people never expected that they would be wearing the hat of fundraiser and taking on those responsibilities. But something in your world, whether that be something out of your control, a situation that needed help, or a passion that you're working towards, prompted you to take on the role of fundraiser. And we want to help make that process as easy as possible. I also want to thank you for your time today. It is not easy to find 30 minutes on the best of days. And given what's going on in your world, it's likely even harder to find 30 minutes on a day like today. So thank you so much for finding that time. I am going to hopefully make this time really useful with some key things that you can take away and put into play. We had a couple people join since I said this, so I just want to make sure that everyone's comfortable. And with the fact that there's no cameras on, I am the only one with the camera on, so you can sit back and relax and take the information in. You don't need to worry about being on. All right, today's agenda is going to be two parts. The first is going to be more content that I've pre-created and put together for you about the 5 proven steps for successful fundraising. And then at the end, we're going to have time for some Q&A. So again, use that Q&A button on the Zoom screen. That's going to send it over to my colleague Jane, who is going to either respond directly or share those with me during our Q&A session. All right, so here's what we say are 5 steps for setting up your fundraiser for success. 1, run a dynamic fundraiser. Keep your fundraiser updated with details and information about you and your cause. We'll talk about ways to do that. 2, find a champion or champions. Find people close to you who can support you in your fundraiser journey, both in some very practical ways as well as some emotional ways. And again, we will talk about each of these steps. Next, find your communities. Who are the people in your world that you can reach out to and share your fundraiser with? Finally, we're going to talk about sharing your fundraiser. Once you've figured out who you have to share it with, what's the best way to get that word out there? And then finally, how do we do this and what kind of time does it need? All right, first of all, run a dynamic fundraiser. Now, many times people believe that once they've launched their fundraiser, which you all have, that's one of the reasons why you got an invitation here today, that it's done, that that's just the end of the line and it's out and they're done with it. And we really encourage our fundraisers not to think like that. You can change anything on your fundraiser at any point, your story, your picture, your goal amount. And these are things that people frequently do change. So we just want to keep that in mind. If you've recently launched, sometimes it's good to give it a couple days and come back to it and re-review. And when you're taking a look at it with fresh eyes, here are some of the things that we recommend you look at. The story. Sometimes when we write, we're just trying to get things down, and maybe the second times through, we want to word something a little bit differently, add a little bit more information, or heavens forbid, we see a typo. It definitely happens. You can update that. Now, when you're looking through at your story, I want to give some tips that, again, we see with successful fundraisers that we recommend as much as possible to keep a forward, positive take on the situation. And I want to just acknowledge that that isn't always easy. A lot of times what bring people here are more tragic events, right? I myself had a fundraiser in memoriam. And so these are, really challenging situations. I'm not saying to shy away from it or to not talk about it, but we have found that fundraisers that have a positive, here's what this will allow me to do approach to their storytelling resonates the most with donors. So keep that in mind as you go through. Similar concept for your picture. Again, I want to acknowledge many of the things that bring us to GoFundMe are shocking in nature and severe. And there may be pictures that are graphic and severe that help tell that story. But I encourage you not to have those be your only pictures that you use either in your story or your updates or your social media shares. We have found that overall, when we look at the numbers, fundraisers with pictures of smiling people from maybe a happier time resonate more with potential donors. And, some of those reasons might be practical. They're ones that you want to come back to. You want to spend more time on those images. They just remind people of those people and situations that they love. So while I'm not saying don't use your other photos, I'm saying use a combination of them throughout your fundraising journey. This seems to resonate the most with donors. And again, you can update your fundraiser anytime. So you have that option available to you. Next, we're going to talk about finding a champion. And this may be a kind of a new concept of a word that maybe you haven't thought of that much. But what I mean when I talk about a champion is I mean a person or people who are closest to you who can be by your side in some practical ways and some emotional ways during your journey. Think about this as likely a person or people who you don't really need to tell much about your fundraiser because they understand what's going on in your life, right? They're already pretty closely linked to you in your world. And what can this group do? Well, the first is they can help you with things like keeping a dynamic fundraiser. They can look at your fundraiser page and say, hey, here's what's working for me. Maybe here's a few suggestions, right? That you can run something past them. What do you think of this social media share? Would you change anything? Right? Just very practical things. One of the most impactful things that they can do for you is that they can be an early donor and then share to their communities. So when they donate and then share in their communities, it's going to, one, of course, help your fundraiser, but it's also going to build trust in your fundraiser. It's going to start to build that momentum so that when future donors, maybe people who you haven't spoken to in a really long time or only sort of know a little bit, they're going to have trust. They're going to say, oh, look at all these people who have already donated. They know more about this and they're involved, right? And I want to be too. So it's going to build that trust. It's also going to expand it to more people. Many of the people we know in our worlds have a lot of people overlapping with us, but they don't have everybody, right? They've got some group of people who they know, who maybe we only know very loosely, or maybe we don't know at all. And as our champions can share on our behalf, it's going to get our message out to more people. And that is a way also that this champion group can continue to support you without having to continue to give more and more financially. Maybe they make one donation and then they share on your behalf in a couple different places, and that can be really, really impactful. And then the last thing that I want to say about a champion is just a little bit more personal, and that's that a champion can be a great emotional support. Again, I was a fundraiser, and I know firsthand it is hard to continuously put yourself out there and ask for support. Having someone in your corner who understands you and what you're trying to accomplish, who can encourage you through that, is a really big help. All right, so now we've talked about the people closest to us, our inner circle, so to speak. Let's talk about finding what other communities we have as we sort of expand the way we think about who we can share our fundraiser with. So communities can be highly varied, and I'm going to give some examples here of communities that you might be a part of, but there is no possible way that I could think of all of the communities that you may be a part of. And so this is meant to be a creative exercise in many ways to jog your memory about groups that you may have close links to or maybe loose links to, but that you could reach out to. We would kind of talk about your inner, your middle, and your outer circles. And your inner circle is the people who are closest to you, the ones you speak with daily or weekly, the ones who would expect to get a phone call from you when something happened, right? It's a small group of people, but they're very linked to you and your world. We start to expand out to people who have slightly less connection with us. Maybe our middle circle is our people we work with, people who we just communicate with on holidays, our extended family, right? Not just those who live in our household, but things that are, further out. And then our outer circle are even looser connections, maybe things like alumni groups or hobby groups or, larger things that are affiliated with maybe more local, gatherings, but are, affiliated at a larger level, right? Think about just expanding it out. Now you're going to have communities at each of these levels. It just might take some creative thinking. And so when we go through this and I hear from people, I don't have a community, I really encourage them to take a few minutes to think about it. Because then oftentimes we may not have oftentimes it just takes a couple extra thoughts and thinking about lines that might be out there in the world. So these are some questions you might ask yourself, certainly not an exhaustive list, to help understand what communities you might be a part of. So things like, how do you stay active? Are you part of a gym community? Maybe you just go to the same park, or you take the same loop around the lake, or you do whatever it is. Maybe there are people who you do a head nod to every week. Maybe there's a community bulletin board in that place, right? The place that you're a part of. Where do you work? I always recommend, though, if you're going to post in your workplace, that you make sure your employer is okay with it, or at least aware of it, so there's no surprises. Where do you spend your time? Do you go to the same coffee shop every day? And if so, are you friendly with the barista? And notice I didn't say friends. You don't have to be friends. Friendly works. If you're constantly just saying, "Hey, how you doing?" If you acknowledge that you have seen each other before. Perhaps they want to put or would let you put a poster up at their register, or maybe they have a community bulletin board. Where do you worship? That may be your local congregation, and that maybe is small. Maybe you know only a couple people there, but maybe they're part and affiliated with a much larger diocese or much larger group, right? Is there a connection between this immediate group that you're a part of and maybe something bigger? What hobbies do you have? Maybe there are people who you work with directly. Maybe you have a sewing circle that you meet with each week. Maybe it's a less firm group. Maybe it's a gaming community that you are in online. And maybe you've never met face to face, but it's still a group of people of usernames who you see very often, right? Our communities may not always be what we consider the most traditional Sesame Street type communities, but there may be a real link to groups out there, and it might be worth giving it a little bit of thought. So when people tell me I don't have any communities, I really encourage them to go through an exercise like this to help think about spaces that they may not come to mind immediately. All right, so we've thought about our inner circle, and we've thought about what communities we have to reach out to. And now we want to get our message out to as many people as possible. So let's think about how we share our fundraiser. You're going to see this in all of our resources. We encourage you to share early, often, and in multiple ways. The reality is, the more you share, the more likely you are to reach success on GoFundMe. It Your fundraiser needs to get out there, and you are such a great source to get it out there. Now, again, when I say this, there's a very common response back, and that is, but I feel like I'm spamming my people. And so I want to give you a couple reasons why indeed you are not spamming your people. One is noise. There's so much noise out there. Think about your email inbox. Think about your social media. Think about your text messages for that matter, right? There's so much noise out there. So even when a good message is coming through, it is harder and harder to recognize that because we're just bombarded by so many other things. We need to send things multiple times to cut through that. The second is social media algorithms. Now, algorithms are intended to be a black box. One thing we do know, though, is that not every message that we put out there goes to everyone in our community. We need to teach the algorithms that our post is important and useful for our community. One of the ways we can do that is by posting regularly. Another way we can do that is by always adding context and story to your post. Never in social media just post a link and a please donate or anything helps or I need help, right? You don't want just a one liner and your link, and you never want just your link alone. Think about when you see just a link out there or just a link without much information. It doesn't feel trustworthy. It doesn't feel like a thing I want to go. I'm not going to click on a link without context of why I should go there. That's, rough internet behavior. And so we want to avoid looking like a part of that. And instead, we want to always add a written caption, a picture whenever we can. And that's going to be really engaging with our potential donors. They're going to see that. They're going to want to click on it. They're going to want to hear more. So make sure you're always posting regularly and with a quality post. That's going to help our algorithms. And then the other thing I want to say about why you're not spamming people is donor behavior. So I have a very bad habit. I scroll social media late at night. There, I said it, but I doubt I'm the only one, right? So when I'm scrolling late at night, it's the end of my day and I'm tired and I see something that I want to donate to because it resonates. It's someone who I care about and I want to get involved, but it's late at night and I may not be in a place to do that. So I might need to see that over the next 3 nights where I'm scrolling late at night when I shouldn't be. in order to remember to donate on day 4, right? Because I just need it in my head enough that on day 4, I proactively remember. Or maybe I see it late at night one day, and then the next day I'm scrolling, on my lunch break, and that's when I'm ready to take action. And so it's available to me at several different times. So that's another reason why you want to post regularly. Now, if that still doesn't make you feel comfortable, if you still feel a little bit off on that, I recommend you use, well, even if you feel comfortable, I still recommend you use the Facebook and Instagram stories features. These are features that are only up for 24 hours. They disappear after that. And so what's great about that is that as a consumer of social media, I expect for that material to go away every day, and I expect to get new material every day. So, and I even expect for it to be probably around the same themes. And so you can really use that feature because that's an expectation. Folks who are seeing it, they're very used to it. It doesn't mean that your Instagram grid or your Facebook timeline is all just asks, 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 because they disappear. So they don't sit there for a while. So that's a short overview of like social media best practices. But the other thing I want you to take away is that you're not going to ask for help only on social media. You're going to want to share based on the platform. And when I say platform, that sounds like kind of a big fancy tech word. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, sometimes you're going to post on social media. Sometimes you're going to send a text message. Sometimes you're going to email. Sometimes you're going to talk face to face. And you're going to want to do that based on the communities. So we talked in the last bit about what our communities are. Now let's talk about how we might reach them. So again, this is an example to try to spark your imagination about how your communities would work best. So first of all, what is my community? Right? We've got those listed down. Either maybe you actually make a real list, maybe it's mental. And then you say, well, how do they communicate? And channel, these are some marketing terms. I work closely with our marketing team, and so these are some marketing terms. But what does that mean? It means, how do they communicate? And then next is preparation. What do I need to get over and to communicate in that space? So let's take a look at a few examples. My faith-based community might print out a bulletin that goes out to people who are gathering live. That bulletin is printed, so it's going to do really well with a QR code. And GoFundMe has a QR code. If I go into the share into my account, there's multiple ways to post online. There's also a link to QR, and it prints really well in the bulletin. So I might print that out, send that to our administrator or our faith leader, and use that to say, hey, can you put this in the bulletin for me? Maybe for the next couple weeks even. I may have a lunch group, or I may be connected with a lunch group. And this one is actually a very real world example from my fundraiser. My mom has a ladies who lunch group that she meets with every Tuesday. And I knew when I was running mine that this group of women were ones that I wanted to donate to my fundraiser. I knew they would also want to. They were connected with the loved one that I lost. I knew that my mom was a champion, was my best bet to get in with that group. And so what I did was I worked with her and I said, all right, here's how GoFundMe works. Here's some things that you might get questions about. Here's what I'm going to do with this money. Here's why I decided to go this route. So she was well versed. So when she met with that group, she could answer their questions. She could bring it up. She also felt like she was a part of the process in a very positive way. So that was my communication with that group. And then let's say maybe you have a group that you haven't spoken with in a while, something like a high school alumni group. Maybe there's a distribution list, the Tigers Bulletin, and it's an email that goes out. Well, in that case, I might have a little bit of a chance to write a written summary, right? They're going to probably copy and paste what I wrote and put it in. They're not going to want to rewrite it. So I'm going to make sure that it doesn't have any typos. Maybe I'll have my champion read it, make sure it tells the story. And I'm going to make sure that that's ready for them to include in their email, right? So I've done that work. So here are just 3 sample communities that we might be a part of. And you see how different reaching out to each of those groups are. There's a lot of ways to reach our communities, and I encourage you to think about how to reach each one. Now, with that, that might sound somewhat intimidating. So let's talk about time. I had the luxury of having worked here when I was running my fundraiser. And so I knew a lot of these best practices, right? I was sort of on the inside, but I still felt like it was a lot. I had lost someone, and that was emotional, and that took out a lot. And I didn't have a big time and emotional bandwidth during that bit. And yet I knew these best practices. And so I knew that the more time I invested, the more likely I was to reach my goal. I knew that sharing was my best success tactic. So what did I do? Well, each week I set aside, and I ran my fundraiser for about 2.5 weeks. So it was about 3 times I sat down and I said, what do I want to do this week? Who do I want to reach? How do I reach them? What do I need to prepare? And then I put that on a file on my computer. You could do it even in your notes app on your phone. And then each day I could copy and paste or, transpose what it was that was there into wherever I wanted to do. So I only had to think about it once. I made my plan, and then throughout the week, I could pull and make things happen. A couple notes about time. You do not need to reach your goal at any particular time. You never need to reach your goal and GoFundMe to receive your funds. And I will say also, just remember that donors don't work on the same timeline that we want them to. As I mentioned at the start about best practices and why you're sharing regularly, donors need reminders. They might, even the best intentioned donor may not be able to make that action right then and there and can forget it. There's a lot of things going on in this world, or maybe they're waiting for something like payday. So make sure you have a plan in place that gives spaces to remind people, friendly, of course, and give them the time to actually take the action that they want to take.